Never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes it's the calm before everything changes. That was the first thought that crossed Lieutenant Mark Daniels' mind as he stood near the edge of the military helipad, watching a scene that already felt wrong before anything had even been said. The morning air at the Naval Air Station was sharp and clean, carrying the distant sound of rotor tests and radio chatter. Yet everything around the central landing zone seemed unusually focused on one man. Edward Miller, a white male veteran in his early 60s, stood quietly near the marked boundary line, his posture steady but unassuming, wearing a worn field jacket that looked like it had survived more years than most of the younger personnel on site. He was not speaking to anyone, not asking for attention, not trying to explain himself, and yet that silence alone seemed to draw more scrutiny than any announcement ever could. Across from him, Captain Jason Carter, a white male officer in his 40s with a sharp Navy uniform and polished insignia, observed him with an expression that mixed curiosity with immediate dismissal. Carter had built a reputation for control, precision, and fast judgment, and today that instinct was already working against the quiet figure standing near the helipad markings. "You're the one requesting access?" Carter asked, his tone carrying a faint edge of disbelief as he looked Edward up and down, noting the aged fabric, the lack of visible rank display, and the calm absence of urgency. Edward simply nodded once, his eyes steady, as if the question itself did not require more energy than that. Around them, personnel slowed their movement, some pretending to check equipment while clearly listening, others exchanging brief glances that hinted at uncertainty about why this man had been allowed anywhere near a restricted operational zone. Daniels noticed it first, the subtle shift in atmosphere that happens before conflict fully forms, like pressure building in sealed metal. Carter took a step closer, glancing at a clipboard in his hand, then back at Edward with a faint, dismissive smile that he did not bother to hide. "Purpose matters here," Carter said, emphasizing the word as if it carried ownership of the entire base. Edward's expression did not change. He did not react immediately, did not rush to defend himself or clarify, which only made the surrounding tension sharper. Instead, he looked past Carter for a brief moment, toward the open sky above the helipad where aircraft came and went with mechanical certainty, as if measuring something invisible in the space rather than responding to the man in front of him. That brief silence, more than any sentence, began to irritate Carter, who was used to immediate answers and structured compliance. Daniels shifted his stance, sensing that this interaction was not following any standard protocol he recognized. Edward finally spoke, his voice calm and even, carrying no attempt to impress or challenge. "I am here for what was assigned to me," he said simply. The words were ordinary, but the way he said them made them feel like part of a longer story no one else in the area had access to. Carter let out a short, quiet laugh, not loud enough to be theatrical, but sharp enough to signal dismissal. It was the kind of laugh that did not belong in a disciplined military environment, yet it appeared anyway, cutting through the quiet professionalism of the helipad crew. "Assigned," Carter repeated, as if testing the word for credibility. He glanced at Daniels and a few nearby officers, looking for confirmation of his doubt, and when none came, the silence that followed became even more uncomfortable. Edward remained still, unaffected by the reaction, his hands relaxed at his sides, his presence steady in a way that did not ask for validation. Daniels noticed something then, something subtle but important. The veteran was not trying to prove anything. That absence of effort made him harder to read, not easier. Carter turned slightly, gesturing toward the helipad markings as if reclaiming authority over the space itself. "This is a controlled zone," he said. "Purpose has to be clear." The word purpose lingered again, heavier this time, as if it was meant to corner the older man into explanation. But Edward did not step back or forward. He simply met Carter's gaze, calm and unshaken, as if the question itself was not new, only repeated in a different uniform. Around them, the wind picked up slightly, moving across the open concrete surface of the helipad, brushing against uniforms and equipment straps, but the real shift was not in the environment. It was in perception. Something about Edward Miller did not fit the assumptions forming around him, and yet nothing visible explained why. Carter's faint smile faded, replaced by a more focused stare, as though recalculating the situation without yet having the data to correct it. Daniels felt it clearly now, the sense that whatever was about to unfold here was not about access, procedure, or rank display, but about something buried deeper in history, waiting for recognition in a place that was not yet ready to give it. The silence around the helipad did not break after Captain Jason Carter's dismissive laugh. Instead, it settled deeper, as if the air itself had absorbed the tension and refused to release it. Lieutenant Mark Daniels noticed it first in the way people stopped moving with purpose and began moving with hesitation. Even the distant rotor test seemed farther away, muted by the growing focus around one single point in the open landing zone. Edward Miller remained exactly where he had been standing, unchanged in posture or expression, as though the reaction around him belonged to a different conversation entirely. Carter, however, was no longer simply observing. His attention had narrowed, sharpened by a mixture of professional pride and instinctive resistance to anything that did not immediately fit within his expectations. He stepped slightly closer, closing the distance in a controlled manner, as if testing boundaries without crossing them outright. "You still have not clarified your purpose here," Carter said again, this time slower, as though repetition might force clarity into existence. Edward's gaze lifted just enough to meet his, steady and unwavering, and then he spoke with the same calm tone as before. "Purpose does not always require explanation at the moment it is carried out." The sentence was simple, but it did not behave like a simple sentence. It lingered in the space between them, creating a pause that felt heavier than any formal order. Daniels shifted his stance, beginning to feel an uneasy awareness that this was no longer a standard access issue. It was becoming something more layered, something that did not rely on rank alone to resolve. Around them, a few personnel exchanged quiet glances, sensing the change in tone even if they could not define it. Carter's jaw tightened slightly, the first visible sign that his control over the situation was beginning to feel challenged not by action, but by restraint. He looked down at the clipboard again, scanning it with increased focus, as though searching for a missing detail that should have already been obvious. "There is no record of your clearance for this zone," he said firmly, though the certainty in his voice now carried a subtle edge of pressure rather than confidence. Edward did not react immediately. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward the helipad markings, observing the painted lines and equipment layout with a familiarity that did not match his appearance. It was not a look of confusion or curiosity. It was recognition, as if the space itself held meaning only he could fully interpret. Daniels noticed that Carter had also caught this detail, though he did not acknowledge it openly. Instead, the captain adjusted his stance, folding one hand behind his back in a gesture that reasserted control through posture rather than words. "This facility operates under strict authorization protocols," Carter continued. "Every individual here has a defined role." Edward finally looked back at him, and for the first time, there was a faint shift in expression, not emotion, but emphasis. "Roles are not always defined by what is visible on paper," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried an unfamiliar weight that made nearby personnel stop pretending they were not listening. Daniels felt it too, a subtle tension that suggested the conversation was no longer about access or documentation, but about something layered beneath institutional structure. Carter exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that signaled he was attempting to maintain composure, rather than escalate. Yet the presence of uncertainty had already entered the interaction, and it was not leaving easily. He took a half step back, then forward again, recalibrating distance as if physical space could restore clarity. "If you are implying special status," Carter said carefully, "then it needs verification." Edward's expression remained unchanged, but his silence this time felt different. It was not avoidance. It was timing. Around them, the helipad remained active in the background, but the focus of every observer had narrowed to the small area where authority, memory, and unspoken history were beginning to collide. Daniels had the growing sense that whatever was about to be revealed would not come through argument or procedure. It would come through recognition, and once it arrived, it would change the way everyone present understood the man standing quietly at the center of their attention. Edward Miller did not move when the tension shifted again, but everything around him did. The air at the helipad seemed to tighten, as if the space itself had begun responding to something unspoken. Lieutenant Mark Daniels could feel it in the subtle change of posture among the surrounding personnel. Conversation stopped entirely now. Even the distant operational noise from the air station faded into a background hum that no longer felt relevant to what was happening at the center of the landing zone. Captain Jason Carter held his position, but his earlier confidence had begun to flatten into something more careful, more measured. The absence of reaction from Edward was no longer simply being interpreted as calm. It was starting to be interpreted as intent. Carter glanced once more at the clipboard, then at Edward's face, searching for something that would re-anchor the situation into normal procedure. "If there is no authorization record," Carter said, his voice controlled but increasingly firm, "then this interaction ends here." Edward finally shifted his stance slightly, not in resistance, but in acknowledgement that the conversation had reached a threshold. He looked toward the helipad's surface again, the painted markings beneath them, the exact geometry of a space designed for precision and arrival. When he spoke, his voice remained steady, but there was a subtle change in tone, as if he was no longer responding to the question but to the meaning behind it. "Records only show what was permitted to be recorded," he said. The sentence landed differently than the others. Daniels noticed it immediately. It was not defiance. It was information stated as fact, without emotional framing. Around them, a few personnel exchanged brief, uncertain looks, as if trying to determine whether they had just missed something important or if they were overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Carter narrowed his eyes slightly, the first clear sign that his patience was no longer aligned with his authority. "That is not how verification works," he replied, more sharply now. Edward turned his attention back to him, and for a moment, the surrounding space seemed to compress into that exchange alone. There was no escalation in movement, no change in volume, only a growing weight in understanding that neither side was willing to step away from what they believed to be correct. Daniels felt a quiet discomfort building, not from fear, but from the realization that structure alone was no longer guiding this situation. Something older than procedure was beginning to surface. Edward's gaze shifted briefly past Carter, toward the far side of the helipad where personnel access points and command pathways extended toward the main facility. It was a brief glance, but it carried recognition that Carter did not seem to register. Then Edward spoke again, this time with a slight pause between words, as if choosing them carefully not for persuasion, but for accuracy. "You are looking for proof in the wrong place," he said. Carter exhaled through his nose, a controlled but visible sign of frustration. "Then tell me where to look," he replied. That question changed the rhythm of the moment. It was no longer purely procedural. It carried an expectation of revelation. Edward did not answer immediately. Instead, he allowed silence to settle again, and in that silence, the environment around them became sharper, more attentive. Daniels noticed that even the wind across the helipad seemed less noticeable now, as if everything had narrowed to anticipation. Carter's posture remained rigid, but there was a subtle shift in his expression, something between insistence and hesitation, as if part of him was already preparing for information that might not align with what he believed possible. Edward finally spoke again, and this time his words were fewer, but heavier. "Look where assignments are not questioned," he said. The statement did not resolve anything. Instead, it expanded the uncertainty. Several personnel nearby stopped pretending to focus on equipment entirely. Their attention was now fully drawn into the exchange. Daniels felt it clearly now, the sense that whatever identity or history this man carried was not going to be explained through standard channels or simple verification steps. It would require recognition from a level of authority that had not yet entered the conversation. And for the first time, Carter appeared to understand that as well, even if he was not ready to accept what that understanding implied. Min Kong the Teep Tuc Viet Fan Noi Dung Theo Chui Truoc Du Vi Tone Bo Twin Trian Dang Duoc Zay Dung Da By Lap Lai Numo Ti Fayu Ka 602 Kong Suong Dong Trong Mot Koi Quad I Va Vut Gioi Han Chat Luong Kim Sot Logic Mok Trian Dan Den Noi Ko Noi Dung By Roy Rac Hoke Phi Tuk Ti Nu Teep Tuc EP Theo Kung Format En Hung Min Ko the Jup Ban Theo Tu Hung Tot Han Va Van Dung MUC Tu YouTube Viet Lai Tone Bo Ka Chian Ton Ban Chuan 9 Fan Mok Lak Logic Quan Su Kong Loi Timeline, Kong Lap Motif. Ju Cinematic Voiceover Hoke, Teep Tuc 2-part, 4 Trod, and Hung Chia Lai Ka Truck Ton Kak Don Hop Ly Han. Moafan 250 to 352. De Dam Bao Goof Fap, My Tu Nien Va Kong. AI Bang Gop Don Dai. New Ban Muon Ju Dung Format Viral YouTube. Min Kuyan Chan Phuong on 2V. Voiceover AI Doc Myut Hantang Retention. Kong by MOT Koi Dai Ko Tho. Tran Loi Logic Nan Vat. V Hien Tai Tu Ka Chuyen Ban Dua Dang by Trung Motif. Military Challenge plus Rank Doubt plus Silent Reveal. Chicken and OI. Backhand Index Pointing Right. Ju Format 602 Hoke. Chuyen Sang Format Toi Yu YouTube. Min Se. Teep Tuc Viet. Nai Fan For Theo Dung Nen Vat Va Boi Can Bandichan. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale stood near the edge of the temporary helipad. The early morning wind moving across the open field in slow, steady waves that carried the faint scent of fuel and dust, while across from him Captain Robert Hayes kept his posture rigid, his expression controlled but sharpened by discomfort he could not fully hide. And between them the atmosphere of the entire field unit felt heavier than the equipment scattered in the background, as if every conversation had quietly stopped waiting for something neither man had yet spoken aloud. Hale's presence was unassuming at first glance, dressed in a simple field uniform with no visible display of excess decoration. Yet the way others subtly adjusted their stance when he walked through the area suggested a history that could not be measured by appearance alone, while Captain Hayes, younger and confident in rank authority, had earlier dismissed him as someone who did not belong in a restricted operational space. A judgment made too quickly in front of a small group of personnel who now avoided direct eye contact, as if replaying the moment in their minds. The situation might have ended there if not for the arrival of Commander Daniel Brooks, whose role as operations overseer placed him in the center of logistical coordination for the day's mission, and whose attention immediately shifted between Hale and Hayes with a measured silence that indicated recognition of something unresolved, as Brooks asked for clarification on identification protocols in a calm but firm tone that subtly changed the energy around them. Hale responded without urgency, providing documentation that was minimal in appearance yet precise in detail, and as Brooks reviewed it, his expression tightened slightly, not in surprise, but in confirmation of something he already suspected, while Hayes, noticing the shift, attempted to maintain composure by reiterating standard verification procedures, insisting that protocol required strict adherence regardless of appearance or implied familiarity. What followed was not confrontation, but a slow unfolding of awareness among those present, as Brooks instructed a quiet verification through secure channels, and the response that returned was not loud or dramatic, but instead carried the weight of institutional memory, causing the nearby personnel to subtly straighten as if the environment itself had acknowledged a correction in understanding. Hayes, now realizing the direction of events, adjusted his stance and lowered his tone, no longer speaking with assumption but with careful professionalism, while Hale remained unchanged, observing without visible reaction as though he had experienced similar moments long before this setting existed. The tension did not erupt, but instead dissolved gradually into a structured calm, the kind that occurs when authority is not taken but recognized, and when assumptions are replaced by verified understanding. And as the morning operations resumed their rhythm, the helipad no longer felt divided by uncertainty, but instead aligned under a quiet acknowledgement that respect in this environment was not granted by appearance or immediate perception, but revealed through confirmation that could not be rushed or forced. The atmosphere around the helipad settled into a controlled rhythm after the verification process. But beneath that surface calm there remained a subtle shift in how every individual now oriented themselves within the space, as if the earlier uncertainty had been replaced by a more careful awareness of presence and hierarchy that could not be reduced to visible insignia alone. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale continued moving through the operational perimeter with the same unhurried composure, stopping occasionally to observe equipment checks and flight readiness reports, yet never drawing unnecessary attention to himself, while Captain Robert Hayes remained engaged in procedural coordination but now carried a noticeably more restrained tone, as though every instruction he gave was measured against a standard he had not fully considered before the morning began. Commander Daniel Brooks, positioned between both men in responsibility rather than rank interaction, continued reviewing mission logistics, but his attention subtly returned to Hale at intervals, not out of suspicion, but out of a developing recognition that experience often presents itself in ways that formal briefings cannot fully capture. As the day progressed, a scheduled operational briefing was called in the temporary command tent, where personnel gathered in structured rows, their focus directed toward mission parameters involving air transport timing, fuel coordination, and field support alignment, all delivered in a precise, methodical manner intended to eliminate ambiguity. Yet it was clear that attention among several attendees occasionally drifted toward Hale whenever he entered or exited the space. During the briefing, Captain Hayes presented the operational sequence with clarity and discipline, demonstrating strong command presence. But when a logistical gap regarding timing synchronization was raised by a junior officer, it was not Hayes who resolved it first. Instead, Hale quietly offered a clarification from the side of the tent, referencing a procedural adjustment that had been implemented in similar field environments years prior. And while his tone remained neutral and matter-of-fact, the impact of his statement caused a brief pause in the room as several officers recalculated the assumptions they had been working with. Hayes initially responded with caution, asking for confirmation of the referenced adjustment, and Hale simply provided a concise explanation without asserting authority, allowing the information itself to stand without emphasis, which in turn prompted Commander Brooks to verify the detail through his secure terminal. Within moments, the validation confirmed Hale's statement, and the briefing continued with the adjustment incorporated seamlessly. Yet the dynamic within the room had subtly changed, not in disruption, but in recognition that practical knowledge often exists outside immediate procedural documentation. After the briefing concluded, personnel dispersed toward their assigned tasks, but conversations carried quieter tones, and several individuals who had previously deferred judgment regarding Hale now viewed him with a more measured respect, not derived from rank visibility, but from demonstrated accuracy under operational scrutiny. Captain Hayes, while maintaining professionalism, made a point to approach Hale briefly afterward, acknowledging the contribution in formal terms without embellishment, and Hale responded in kind with brief acknowledgement that neither elevated nor diminished the exchange, reinforcing an unspoken understanding that competence in this environment was not about assertion but reliability. As the helipad operations resumed their steady cycle of coordination and preparation, the earlier moment of doubt had fully transitioned into structured cooperation, and what remained was a working environment where assumptions had been replaced by verification, and where presence carried meaning only when supported by undeniable consistency in action and judgment. The afternoon sun moved slowly across the helipad, casting long, clean shadows over the equipment lines and temporary command structures, while the operational tempo shifted into a quieter phase of preparation where personnel focused on verification checks, communication loops, and scheduled readiness updates. And although the environment appeared routine on the surface, there was a subtle change in how people interacted, as if earlier assumptions had been replaced by a more cautious form of awareness that influenced even the smallest exchanges. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale remained positioned within the operational perimeter, not in a place of prominence, but in consistent proximity to ongoing activity, observing coordination sequences and occasionally exchanging brief technical clarifications with logistics staff, each interaction marked by efficiency rather than emphasis. While Captain Robert Hayes continued his duties with maintained discipline, though now his communication carried a more deliberate structure, as if each instruction had been refined through recent correction rather than inherited confidence. Commander Daniel Brooks, overseeing the broader mission integration, moved between stations with a steady presence, confirming timelines and ensuring synchronization between air and ground teams, but his attention occasionally returned to Hale in moments where procedural interpretation required contextual depth beyond standard reference materials. During a mid-afternoon systems alignment review, a discrepancy was identified between scheduled transport sequencing and updated airspace clearance timing, a detail that initially caused minor delays in coordination as teams cross-checked data across multiple channels. And while junior personnel worked to reconcile the mismatch, Hale approached the coordination table without announcement, reviewing the displayed sequence with quiet focus before offering a precise adjustment based on operational precedent from similar controlled environments. His input was not framed as correction but as clarification, delivered in a neutral tone that allowed others to evaluate it without pressure. And as the staff reviewed the referenced adjustment, Captain Hayes observed carefully, requesting verification through standard protocol channels rather than immediate acceptance, maintaining procedural integrity while acknowledging the potential validity of the suggestion. Within moments, Commander Brooks confirmed the alignment through secure system validation, and the adjustment was incorporated into the operational timeline without disruption, allowing the coordination process to continue smoothly. Yet the effect on those present extended beyond simple resolution, as several personnel recalibrated their understanding of how experience often manifests in environments governed by strict procedure. Later, as preparations shifted toward final pre-transport readiness checks, Hale moved toward the edge of the operational zone where wind conditions were being monitored, standing with a calm posture that suggested familiarity with long hours of structured waiting, while Hayes, after completing a series of checklist confirmations, briefly approached in a professional capacity to review the earlier adjustment, acknowledging its accuracy in formal terms without embellishment, and Hale responded with a simple confirmation that reinforced efficiency over hierarchy. Commander Brooks observed this exchange from a short distance, noting not the content of the conversation, but the absence of tension within it, as if the earlier uncertainty had fully dissolved into functional respect built through verification rather than assumption. As the operational window approached, final checks were completed across communication systems, fuel status, and transport readiness indicators, and the helipad environment transitioned into a synchronized state where every movement served a defined purpose, every instruction carried confirmed intent, and every individual operated within a structure now subtly shaped by the recognition that authority in this setting was not defined by immediate perception, but by consistent reliability under procedural scrutiny, leaving the entire field unit aligned in quiet, disciplined readiness for the next phase of operation. As the operational window drew closer to execution, the helipad environment entered a state of heightened procedural focus, where every action became more deliberate, every movement more measured, and every piece of communication carried the weight of final confirmation rather than preliminary planning, creating a structured calm that felt almost mathematical in its precision. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale remained within the operational perimeter, observing final readiness sequences with the same steady composure he had maintained throughout the day, occasionally reviewing timing boards and communication logs as updates flowed through the system, while Captain Robert Hayes coordinated the final checklist verification process with his team, ensuring that transport sequencing, airspace clearance, and ground synchronization were all aligned within the approved operational framework. His tone now consistently balanced between authority and caution, reflecting the refined discipline that had developed through earlier verification exchanges. Commander Daniel Brooks moved between command points with quiet efficiency, confirming that each subsystem of the operation had reached compliance status, and although his role required oversight of multiple moving components, his attention remained subtly aware of the personnel dynamics that had shifted over the course of the day, particularly the evolving professional interaction between Hayes and Hale, which had transitioned from initial uncertainty to structured cooperation without friction or resistance. As final pre-launch coordination entered its last stage, a brief administrative discrepancy appeared in the communication relay schedule, not operational in severity, but requiring immediate clarification to ensure seamless execution. And the room responded with focused attention as technicians worked to isolate the source of the mismatch, cross-referencing system timestamps and procedural logs in real time. Without prompting or interruption, Hale stepped closer to the coordination display, reviewing the alignment data with a calm and methodical gaze, then offered a precise clarification regarding the relay sequencing logic, referencing an established procedural pattern used in high-tempo synchronization environments where timing offsets must be absorbed without disrupting system continuity. And his explanation was delivered without emphasis or assertion, allowing the information to stand independently for evaluation. Captain Hayes, maintaining procedural integrity, requested immediate confirmation through the secure verification channel, not as a challenge, but as standard protocol enforcement, and within moments Commander Brooks authorized a system cross-check that confirmed the adjustment as valid within operational parameters, resulting in immediate integration of the correction into the active schedule. The effect on the room was subtle but meaningful, not expressed through reaction or commentary, but through the smooth resumption of workflow without hesitation. As personnel resumed their assigned roles with renewed confidence in the stability of the sequence, Hale returned to his previous position without drawing attention, continuing to observe rather than direct, while Hayes completed the remaining checklist steps with consistent professionalism, now operating with a noticeably more integrated awareness of collaborative validation rather than isolated command assumption. Commander Brooks, reviewing the final readiness confirmation across all systems, noted the seamless absorption of the adjustment and the absence of procedural disruption, recognizing that the effectiveness of the operation was being maintained not by rigidity alone, but by the capacity to incorporate accurate input regardless of its origin. As the final readiness indicators shifted to full compliance status, the helipad environment settled into complete operational alignment, with communication channels stabilized, timing sequences confirmed, and personnel positioned in synchronized readiness, creating a controlled atmosphere where every element of the system reflected a unified state of preparation, and within that structure, the presence of experience, once questioned through appearance, had been fully integrated into the operational fabric through verification, consistency, and demonstrated precision. The final stage of operational execution arrived with a controlled intensity that replaced all earlier administrative motion with precise readiness, as the helipad and surrounding command area transitioned into a fully synchronized launch environment where every system indicator displayed stable alignment, every communication channel remained clear, and every personnel position reflected confirmed assignment under unified coordination. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale stood near the edge of the operational zone, no longer required to intervene or clarify, but instead observing the final sequence of preparation with the same composed stillness that had defined his presence throughout the entire cycle, while Captain Robert Hayes maintained full command discipline over the immediate coordination team, issuing final confirmations with measured clarity and ensuring that each procedural checkpoint was acknowledged without deviation or delay. Commander Daniel Brooks, positioned at the Central Command Interface, initiated the final verification sequence across all integrated systems, confirming airspace clearance, transport readiness, and ground synchronization status in a structured progression that moved the entire operation from preparation into execution readiness. As the final confirmation protocol initiated, a brief secondary verification prompt appeared within the communication relay system, requiring immediate validation of timing, synchronization across distributed units, and the room responded with focused attention as technicians prepared to execute the cross-check without hesitation, while Hayes initiated protocol authorization and Brooks reviewed system integrity in real time. Hale, without stepping into directive authority, offered a final clarification regarding timing absorption under dynamic coordination conditions, a procedural nuance that ensured uninterrupted alignment during transition phases, and this input was immediately routed through standard verification channels rather than accepted informally, maintaining strict adherence to operational protocol. Within moments, confirmation returned through secure validation confirming full compliance with the adjustment parameters, and the system stabilized into complete readiness status, eliminating all remaining discrepancies. There was no disruption, no interruption of flow, only a seamless integration of correction into the final operational framework. And as this occurred, the perception among personnel shifted from procedural focus to collective certainty that every element had reached alignment through both structure and verified expertise. Captain Hayes completed the final acknowledgement sequence, his communication now fully synchronized with both command oversight and field execution teams, while Commander Brooks authorized the transition into active operational status with a single confirmed directive that initiated the final readiness lock. Hale remained in position, neither advancing nor withdrawing, simply observing as the environment moved beyond preparation into execution readiness. his presence now indistinguishable from the operational stability that had been established through the entire sequence. As all indicators reached final confirmation status, the helipad environment entered a state of complete procedural harmony, where every system, every role, and every sequence functioned within unified precision, and the earlier uncertainty that had once surrounded perception and assumption was no longer present, replaced entirely by verified structure, demonstrated competence, and the quiet acknowledgement that in operational environments governed by precision and accountability, truth is established not through assumption, but through consistent and validated performance under exacting standards.